17 June 1944, Saipan. The U.S. 27th Infantry Division, under the command of Major General Ralph Smith, comes ashore near the southern end of the island and moves inland. The mission of the 27th is to provide relief to the 2nd and 4th Marine Divisions, who have battled fierce Japanese resistance since landing here 2 days ago. Clearing Saipan was scheduled to take 3 days, but the island's mountainous terrain has allowed the Emperor's army to dig in and mount a brutal defense. Most of the 27th has shifted north to a position between the 2nd and 4th Marine Divisions, and the Americans begin clearing the northern half of the island. Though it is clear the Japanese cause on Saipan is lost, commanders order a suicidal (17 June 1944), with the Allied invasion force pushing off the beaches and through the German lines, Adolf Hitler and his top generals gather in Soissons, northeast of Paris. The topic? How best to defend against the burgeoning Allied presence on the continent. Field Marshals Erwin Rommel and Gert von Rundstedt are adamant in their belief that Normandy is lost. The only sane course is for the German army to fall back, regroup, and prepare a counterattack. Hitler disagrees. Despite the fact that shipload after shipload of troops and material are pouring onto the Normandy beachhead, he remains convinced that the main Allied invasion will come at the Pas de Calais, 200 miles east of the actual invasion site. Rather than allowing his generals to resituate their armies, he insists they stay where they are and accuses all who disagree of cowardice and treason. At the Normandy beachhead, the onslaught continues. American troops push inland from Omaha Beach toward the towns of Saint-Lô and Corentin. Their capture begins the process of isolating the Cotentin Peninsula and the port of Cherbourg. Despite fanatic German resistance, by 18 June, the American 9th Division has pushed far enough west to cut 3 German infantry divisions off from their parent unit, stranding them on the peninsula. At the same time, the American 4th Division moves up the peninsula's eastern coast, sealing the Germans' only avenue of escape. What Allied commanders hope will be the final assault on Cherbourg begins on 22 June, when the RAF and Army Air Force begin softening up the city. First come waves of Mustangs and Typhoons, strafing and firing rockets into German defensive outposts. Behind the fighters come B-26 Marauders, medium bombers that swoop in swiftly and are gone before the German anti-aircraft gunners can home in on them. With Hitler's orders ringing in their ears, the German generals throw everything they have into the battle. German ack-ack gunners hold up under withering attack, knocking down 38 Allied fighters and one of the bombers. The Allies counter with an artillery barrage of their own, silencing the German 88s and allowing the Allied aircraft unfettered access to the German positions. The American ground assault comes just after noon with elements of the American 9th and 79th Divisions attacking on either side of the main highway to Cherbourg. Near the town of Vallon, elements of the 313th Regiment encounter a pocket of Nazi resistance. What had been a methodical march up the peninsula explodes into a full-blown battle. A textbook flanking maneuver by the American 3rd Battalion shatters the German line. Though the German cause on the peninsula is clearly doomed, the trapped Nazis fight fiercely to hold their ground. 3 regiments of the 4th Infantry Division find themselves in a bewildering nightmare of hedgerows. Bloody fighting moves field to field. The Allied push is, however, inexorable. By nightfall on the 22nd, American troops are within a mile of Cherbourg. The next day, they capture a nearby hill, giving artillery spotters a commanding view of all the approaches to the city. The German commander, Generalleutnant Karl Wilhelm von Schlieben, sends word to his superiors that he has spent his reserves and is exhausted in body and spirit, but will obey his Führer's orders to keep fighting. Von Schlieben's commitment makes little difference. By 24 June, the Allies have pushed nearly to the Cherbourg waterfront. There they call a temporary halt, allowing P-47s from England to decimate the remaining German force. On the 25th, a small armada of naval ships joins in the bombardment, pummeling the Germans without respite. On the 26th, von Schlieben radios Rommel that loss of the city is unavoidable. With American infantry all around him, he orders the burning of documents and the destruction of encryption equipment. Down to his last 800 troops, von Schlieben finally surrenders. On the 27th, the city is secure. The only German troops left alive on the Cotentin Peninsula are prisoners of war. Engineers go to work immediately to reopen the port of Cherbourg, which will speed the rate of the Allied buildup considerably. Rommel and von Rundstedt, still laboring under their Führer's irrational command, try to find a way to stop the Allied advance without giving any ground. June 17, 1944, the Philippine Sea. 2 Japanese naval groups link up east of the Philippine island of Leyte and steam to the northeast. The combined fleet under the command of Vice Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa is the driving force of Operation Argo, the Japanese plan to cripple the U.S. Navy. Ozawa's carrier force will be augmented by aircraft flying from airfields on the island of Guam. What Ozawa does not Force 58 Commander Vice Admiral Mark Mitcher is informed that the Japanese fleet has been located 300 miles away, outside the range of his fighters. He is also survive what American pilots have begun to call the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. Despite the overwhelming success, Spruance is frustrated. He knows he has the enemy on the ropes, but his strict interpretation of his orders has kept him too far away to land the knockout punch. By the following day, he can no longer resist and finally orders Mitcher to pursue the enemy. However, by the time they are spotted, they are at the extreme end of his fighter's operational range, and it is so late in the day that the pilots will have to return and land in darkness. Nevertheless, the chance to strike a blow against a helpless enemy is too great to pass up. Mitcher launches the strike. When the Americans reach their target, they find an enemy already reeling. U.S. submarines, under orders to shoot first and report later, have already sent 2 of the 9 carriers to the bottom. Ozawa orders what is left of his planes to the defense. Of the 80 that get airborne, 65 go down in flames. Short on fuel and sunlight, American bombers pounce on the first ships they see, sinking 1 carrier and 3 tankers, as well as damaging 4 other ships before flying off into the sunset. Despite the resounding victory, Spruance is unhappy with the results of the previous day's battle. The attack, while successful, is not the death blow he had hoped for. In addition, fewer than half of the pilots who flew off the day before returned safely. Of those who survived the battle, many lost their way in the night. Still others ran out of fuel and were forced to ditch in the dark waters of the Pacific. Some are rescued. Others are not so lucky. By the time recovery operations are completed, the Japanese have made their getaway. Spruance has no choice but to order Task Force 58 back to its station. The Battle of the Philippine Sea is over. For Spruance, that victory is bittersweet. While his pilots have struck a heavy blow against the enemy, his own caution kept them from taking the Japanese Navy out of the game once and for all. Like a gambler who draws a royal flush on a $2 bet, his joy in winning cannot overcome the bitter feelings of an opportunity lost. reclaim them upon their return, but provisions still had to be made. Present is fraught with peril. His future is secure. June 1944, QC, Italy. Allied armies find themselves facing the Albert Line, yet another German defensive line in the mountainous center of the country, leading their way over the mountainous terrain. It takes 2 weeks of hard combat, but by 14 July, the 8th is in a position to launch a formal attack on Arezzo itself. Within 2 days, the city falls as the Germans withdraw towards the Arno River. By 17 July, American troops had made swift advances along the Tyrrhenian coast, having captured the towns of Pignano, Poggibonsi, and Volterra. The Fifth Army now has Leghorn within striking distance. Allied ships clearing mines off the coast convince Nazi commanders that there is an Allied amphibious assault on the way. In fact, there is no such assault planned. Nevertheless, the Germans begin concentrating their forces just north of the city. The Allied push comes not from the sea but from the land. As a result of the German shift, some elements of the U.S. 34th Division find the going relatively easy. Troops sent ahead to probe German defenses managed to complete much of the envelopment of Leghorn with minimal fighting. 10 miles east, however, near the town of Foglia, the fighting is bitter. German mortar and artillery fire pins the Americans down, and local counterattacks threaten their flanks. Despite their lack of veteran leadership, the GIs hold and soon regain the initiative. Street by street, they drive the Germans from the town and push toward the Arno. By nightfall of 18 July, much of Leghorn has been surrounded, and elements of the 34th prepare for a frontal assault on the city. Allied commanders are unsure how events will unfold. Until now, German resistance north of Rome has been sporadic. They stand and fight for one village while leaving others uncontested. In the Allies' mind, Leghorn is crucial, but will the Germans deem it so? Will the fight for the city be a bloodbath like Cassino or a walkthrough? Either way, the fall of the city seems imminent. Only the cost remains to be determined. Looming in the distance, however, is the Gothic line. And there is no doubt as to the Germans' intentions. They will test the mettle of the Green Allied troops with a ferocity as great as any yet seen in this war. And once that test is passed, there will be many more to follow. highest elevation in the sector, it has already been the site of costly fighting. As the men and armor of the 2nd push forward, German infantry armed with Panzerfausts knock out the 6 lead Shermans, causing the assault battalion to withdraw. As the Indian Head Division's heavy artillery pounds the German positions, the men regroup for another assault on the hill. Though they have been bloodied, they are no less determined to drive the Germans from their perch. As the big guns lift their barrage, the assault groups once again move forward. This time they meet with more success. The artillery has opened cracks in the German defenses that the GIs are quick to exploit. Although the fighting is brutal and costly, Robertson's men begin to gain the upper hand. By noon, lead units have driven the Germans from the summit. They now have a commanding view of the Béranger Highway, the main east-west route out of Saint-Lô. Meanwhile, to the west, troops of General Charles Gerhardt's 29th Division find themselves in a brutal fight for Hill 122, just north of town. Time and again, infantry charges are repulsed by German artillery and mortar fire. By sunset on the 11th, the 29th has sustained over 500 casualties. Again on the 12th, the men of the 29th try without success to dislodge the Germans. They are again stopped cold. Casualties mount at such a rate that Corlett has no choice but to call off the attack. It seems apparent to Allied commanders that the Germans have no intention of giving up Saint-Lô in favor of a strategic withdrawal. In fact, the word has come down from Der Führer himself: hold the Allies in Normandy until the Luftwaffe and Kriegsmarine sever their supply lines. Many veteran Wehrmacht commanders believe this strategy is foolhardy. Those bold enough to voice their disapproval are immediately subject to Hitler's wrath. Foremost among these is Commander-in-Chief West, Field Marshal Gert von Rundstedt. On 2 July, he was relieved of command when he was audacious enough to advocate a German withdrawal from Normandy. By sacking von Rundstedt, Hitler has removed the man viewed by many in the Allied command as Germany's best officer. He instead has played his cards in an all-or-nothing gamble in Normandy. If he is wrong, if the Allies can break the Wehrmacht in northern France, there will be nothing standing between them and a wide-open romp to the fatherland. July 1944, Normandy. The fight here, which has dragged on for over a month, has degenerated into a slugging match, with both sides badly bloodied but still standing. And while General Omar Bradley's American First Army remains bogged down on the outskirts of Saint-Lô, the balance has begun to tip in the Americans' favor. The reason for this shift is twofold. While fresh GIs continue to pour into the sector, their German counterparts have little hope of reinforcement. In addition, the Allied air forces have been extraordinarily effective in isolating the Normandy beachhead and in restricting German troop movements. The focus of the battle remains Hill 122, north of the town. Despite repeated assaults by troops of the 29th Division, the Germans retain control of the vital hill. It now falls to units of General Paul Bade's 30th. 16 July 1944, northern France. Virtually unchallenged, an RAF fighter pilot roars over the Norman countryside, searching for targets of opportunity. He spots a German staff car racing down the road below. He moves in for the kill. Inside the luckless staff car is Field Marshal Erwin Rommel. Miraculously, Rommel survives the attack. but is severely wounded and unable to continue his duties as commander of Army Group B. For the Allies, it is an incredible stroke of luck. Rumors of Rommel's demise hearten the men in the ranks of the Allied armies, particularly the British, who were time and again bested by an outnumbered, outgunned Rommel in the sun-scorched western desert. The British troops are in need of a lift. They have been locked in a grim struggle with the German 1st and 2nd Panzer Corps for control of Caen, and while they have given as good as they've gotten, they are very weary. The greatest blow to British morale came on 13 June when the 7th Armored Division, the renowned Desert Rats of North Africa, moved to envelop the German positions in a wide flanking maneuver through Villers-Bocage, a small village 15 miles southwest of Caen. On the outskirts of town, they got the bloodiest lesson yet on the superiority of German armor. A Tiger tank under the command of Captain Michael Wittmann single-handedly destroyed 25 British tanks and half-tracks, forcing the assault battalions to beat a hasty retreat. In fact, the battle for Caen has boiled down to the Wehrmacht's superiority in armor versus the British advantage in artillery. While Allied tanks are unable to punch through the German defenses, German counterattacks disintegrate under the murderous fire from British artillery and naval guns. In order to break this stalemate, on 7 July, the British had tried a different tack. The RAF dropped over 2,300 tons of bombs on the northern outskirts of the city. The bombing was devastating. The 16th Luftwaffe Field Division that bore the brunt of the RAF's attack ceased to exist, losing all its battalion commanders and almost 75% of its riflemen. The assault that followed met with determined pockets of German resistance, but little in the way of a coordinated defense. British and Canadian units entering Caen on the morning of 8 July found little left. The month-long battle had not only shattered the German defense, it had turned the medieval city into little more than rubble. Although it had precipitated a breakthrough, the intense bombing had been both a blessing and a curse. Upon reaching the Orne River, which runs through the center of the city, the British could advance no further. Follow-on units found themselves ensnarled in traffic jams due to the rubble-strewn, pockmarked roads. Although they had finally advanced into the city, they were unable to exploit their success. Now, with Rommel removed from the equation, British Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery prepares for a final effort to drive the Germans from the eastern part of the city. Codenamed Operation Goodwood, the plan calls for yet another saturation bombing to precede the assault. On 18 July, over 2,000 RAF and 8th Air Force bombers marked the opening of Goodwood with a deafening roar, dropping over 7,000 tons of high explosives on German positions east of the Orne. Following the bombardment, the British 1st Corps, led by the 11th Armored Division, pushes forward to envelop the German right flank. German defenders, stunned by Bomber Command's pounding, do little to impede the initial advance. But as they regain their senses, resistance begins to stiffen. Meanwhile, the Canadian 2nd Corps, attempting to fix the German middle, pushes directly into the southern suburbs of Caen itself. There, the fighting is especially bloody. It seems every building conceals German machine gun nests, snipers, and anti-tank guns. The British and Canadian troops succeed in advancing some 5 miles into the German positions, but fail to break through. By midday, the British assault is spent. The 11th Armored has reached the Paris-Caen Railroad southeast of the city, but can advance no further. Although the British have failed to break through to the Falaise Plain, Operation Goodwood does convince von Kluge that the main Allied push will come from the east in the British sector. Although the Germans are still holding the Americans at Saint-Lô, their reserves in that sector have been steadily drawn east. 8 out of 9 panzer divisions in Normandy are now committed there. Although this fact may be of little comfort to the Tommies being brutalized by the panzers, history may judge it as a more telling factor in the battle for Normandy than their failure to achieve a quick victory at Caen. like him to expand the war beyond China and into the Pacific. It seems as though the Navy's prolonged punishment has done the trick alive and well on the island of Guam. By Arno River, it will need a fully functional harbor to supply the drive. We'll pass it. Among those gathered around the table was Colonel Klaus von Stauffenberg, a decorated veteran of the North Africa campaign. Having lost an arm and eye in the battle, Stauffenberg came back to Germany to serve as Chief of Staff of the Army Reserve. But as time passed, Stauffenberg, a true military man devoted to his country rather than the Nazi Party, began to believe that Hitler was leading Germany down the road to ruin. And he was not alone. Hundreds of high-ranking officers from every branch of the German armed forces had begun to express the same sentiment in hushed voices. Even the Desert Fox, Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, while declining participation gave tacit approval to the plot to overthrow the Nazis. The meeting began at 12:30 with the participants gathering around a large oak table in the center of the room. Stauffenberg placed his briefcase just 6 feet from Hitler and stepped outside to wait. The blast left the barracks a twisted, smoking wreck. Several of the occupants were killed, but Hitler was not among them, the heavy oak table having shielded him from the force of the blast. He appears later at a train station where he greets deposed Italian dictator Benito Mussolini. Slightly dazed, and with his right arm in a sling, the Nazi leader is bruised but still very much alive. The coup has failed, and already the wheels are turning to make the conspirators pay for their deed. July 1944, northern France. After a costly fight, the strategic road center of Saint-Lô is finally in American hands. For General Omar Bradley, the victory is bittersweet. His American First Army is paid to the tune of 40,000 men, killed, wounded, or captured. It is a high price for a bombed-out city and a total gain of 7 miles. Bradley's attention now turns to Operation Cobra, upon which he is staking much. The plan calls for the First Army to break out of its position in a massive attack along the road running from Saint-Lô to Perrier, 15 miles to the west. Bradley's timetable called for Cobra to begin today, but heavy rains and supply problems force him to delay the attack. After a postponement of 6 days, Operation Cobra finally launches on 24 July and almost immediately runs into trouble. The attack is to be preceded by a massive aerial bombardment, but again, the weather deals Bradley a bad hand. Although the 2,000 bombers are told to turn back, 400 do not hear the order and deliver their bombs. Cloud cover and human error combine to produce tragedy. Many of the bombs fall on Allied troops, killing 25 and wounding more than 100. The tragic mistake is repeated on the 25th, as 111 men of the 30th Division are killed by misguided bombs. Despite the calamity, Bradley orders the attack to begin. The 2nd Armored Division leads the way, penetrating the enemy's main line of defense and mauling the once elite Panzer Division. Behind the tanks, 3 infantry divisions move in to secure the corridor. By the evening of the 26th, Bradley's troops have advanced 3 miles against stiff resistance from German infantry and artillery units. To keep the enemy off balance, 1st Army artillery battalions are ordered to fire through the night. By 28 July, it is clear that Bradley's plan, despite incredible setbacks, has worked. Fighting in the center of the front, the 1st Army's 7th Corps has advanced 16 miles south of the Saint-Lô-Perrier Road. To the right of the 7th Corps, near the coast, Major General Troy Middleton's 8th Corps is just past Coutances, 11 miles beyond the Cobra's starting line. To the east is Major General Leonard Giraud's 5th Corps. They keep a watchful eye on the Germans for any move that might threaten Cobra's left flank. Alarmed by the American Blitzkrieg, the Germans shift reinforcements to the front from southern France. Despite this, Allied commanders remain confident in their ability to exploit Cobra's success, for they are about to unleash an army under the command of a general whose name strikes fear in the hearts of the Germans: George S. Patton. July 1944, Poland. German forces of Army Group Center, who for more than a month have been reeling under the weight of the Soviet summer offensive, managed for the moment to stop the Russian onslaught and re-establish their line along the Vistula River. This sudden halt is a matter of considerable debate in the Allied camp. First August 1944, Avranches, France. Waiting in the wings since the invasion began, 59-year-old General George S. Patton finally gets the opportunity to dig his spurs into the fight for France. His new command, the U.S. Third Army, codenamed Lucky, is to be the primary tool to exploit the breakout of Operation Cobra. Hard-charging and quick-tempered, Patton is disliked by many senior Allied commanders. The British, in particular, are put off by the brash American. But it is the same flamboyant style that raises eyebrows that makes Patton a crucial cog in the Allied wheel. His battlefield savvy and eagerness to carry the fight to the enemy are assets Supreme Allied Commander Dwight Eisenhower prizes. If he must, at times, soothe a few ruffled British feathers, it is a price Ike is willing to pay. In fact, Eisenhower is already an old hand at dealing with Patton's impertinent behavior. In North Enjoy the advantage. In no time at all, tanks are passing over the temple. Treads can reach them. They also mark a clear path for those who follow. Ingenious, and like all expedients, beautiful in its simplicity. And it kind of leaves you wondering, what will they think of next? This war has, for the first time, made commonplace the incredibly complex and dangerous method of attack known as amphibious assault. Nearly every major offensive by the British and Americans has been initiated with a large-scale landing. The logistics of mounting an attack from the sea are almost incomprehensible. Instrumental in getting thousands of men and tons of equipment safely from ship to shore has been the development of myriad specialized shallow draft boats. No less a dignitary than General Dwight Eisenhower has called them the key to victory. Their utility has been limited only by the fact that there are never enough of them to go around. 14 August 1944, Isle of Wight. Don't let appearances fool you. Here, things are not what they seem. You won't play around with the local golf pro, follow it up with an ice cream cone, or stay in the Grand Hotel. This is no place for relaxation. This is the heart of a military operation, for here starts the flow of the Allied Army's lifeblood. Within these walls are the pumping stations that supply gasoline to Allied troops in France through pipelines under the ocean, Pluto for short. Starting here, extending into the English Channel, and ending in Cherbourg, they are but one part of a massive operation to keep the troops resupplied with the hundreds of tons of materials they need each day to drive back the Germans. Once fully operational, Pluto will pump 1 million gallons of gasoline to the front each day through two kinds of specially designed pipe. The first type is multi-layered lengths of pipe connected together using a flange which forms leak-proof joints. It is deployed across the channel by converted merchant ships, using an apparatus much like that used to lay electric lines. The second type is a 3-inch steel pipe which is welded together in a dockside factory to form 3/4-mile lengths. It is flexible enough to wind around a floating steel drum that looks like a massive cotton wheel called a conundrum. The drum holds up to 70 miles of pipe and deploys it as it is towed across the channel. 4 lines have been laid so far. When Operation Pluto is complete, between 15 and 20 of the English Channel. 16 August 1944, Paris, as the Allied command tries to decide what to do about the German occupation of the city, the French gendarmerie precipitates something of a crisis in the City of Lights by going on strike. That strike, in turn, opens the streets to skirmishing between the French underground and the city's Nazi occupiers. The fighting is a symptom of the French impatience over the fate of their capital city. Supreme Allied Commander Dwight Eisenhower favors a plan to bypass Paris, pushing the Allied armies eastward to the Siegfried Line. Ike has long believed that, cut off from the fatherland, the Nazi occupation force would collapse, liberating the city without destructive and costly house-to-house fighting. Ike's concern for the fate of Paris is not unfounded. Adolf Hitler, in a frothing rage over what he considers incompetence among his generals, has ordered his commander on the ground, General Dietrich von Choltitz, to destroy the city. Paris, the ranting Führer insists, must fall into Allied hands only as a heap of rubble. Now, to further complicate things, von Choltitz is confronted with an insurrection and more concerned with purging the enemy within. Fort Dix, New Jersey. In this place where training of the most basic kind goes on, drill sergeants have long cajoled and cursed their young recruits with an eye toward their future good health. With war raging around the world, that training has never been more urgent. And from the looks of what's happening now, the greatest battle the armed forces faces is not in Europe or the Pacific, but in bed. Call it VD Day if you have to, or the invasion of pants, or, well, but that you could avoid mentioning it at all. Unfortunately, that's not an option. As manpower demands increase on all fronts, the armed forces have been forced into a fairly offensive. Propaganda experts, military police, chaplains, and doctors have formed a kind of combined arms team to stem the spread of venereal disease. The battle begins here at basic training, where young and naive recruits, often having never experienced the relevant pleasure, walk towns and countrysides in search of feminine companionship. Despite the admirable efforts of the powers that be, near every large military installation, the world's oldest profession responds with a deluge of alternative recreational possibilities. In England, the prostitutes in and around Piccadilly Circus are becoming a very real problem indeed. The local citizenry, outraged by the sexual antics of American soldiers, demands a crackdown. Houses of ill repute are closed, streetwalkers detained, and red light districts placed strictly off limits. However, much to the chagrin of the military, VD rates among enlisted men continue to rise. That's because there are plenty of amateurs willing to take up where the professionals leave off. They are referred to, perhaps affectionately, as khaki wackies, victory girls, or cuddle bunnies. And they are, like the soldiers themselves, ready, willing, and able. The effect on manpower is staggering. Thousands of soldiers and sailors have become victims of the softer side of war, restricted to quarters by wounds inflicted not by the enemy, but by their own urges. When it becomes clear that standard operating procedure is impotent against this terror, the War Department turns to propaganda, using a series of appallingly graphic films with titles like Good Girls Have VD2. This being a no-holds-barred, below-the-belt fight, the War Department also has a secret weapon: latex.
We have set this period aside to get the old rubber in.
The armed forces are dispensing almost 50,000 condoms a month. Doctors do short arms inspections in the middle of the night to ensure troops not reporting their VD are discovered and treated. Once the men get to the front, VD ceases to be a problem. In battle-torn areas, soldiers are more concerned with the basics of survival than the comforts of the flesh. Of course, there are still those R&R passes to worry about, and there always will be, until the war ends and Johnny comes marching home in a rather odd way. August 25, 1944, Paris. Amidst a torrent of emotion, the Free French troops of General Jacques Leclerc's 2nd Armored Division enter the City of Lights. Parisians pour into the streets to greet the sons of France who, after 4 long years, have returned to liberate the capital city. The last vestiges of shame from the humiliation of 1940 are washed away in a flood of wine, kisses, and flowers. Despite the still brewing debate as to whether the city should have been bypassed, no one in the Allied ranks can help but be delighted that Paris, a paragon of Western civilization, has survived the German occupation. The credit for that goes to the German commander of the city, General Dietrich von Choltitz. Risking not only his life, but those of his family, Choltitz has blatantly disobeyed Hitler's orders to raze the city. Instead, he waits in his headquarters in the Hotel Meurice until Allied commanders arrive to accept his surrender. The next day, the rest of the 2nd Armored enters the city along with the Americans of General Raymond Barton's 4th Division. The GIs are greeted with no less enthusiasm than that afforded their French concentration. The German collapse in northern France has divided the Allied High Command. An increasingly acrimonious debate is growing as how best to exploit the breakout from Normandy and drive on the German frontier. Contending that the Germans are all but whipped and ready for a knockout blow, Montgomery aggressively pushes his plan for a concentrated drive by the 21st Army Group north through Belgium. Its goal would be to seize a bridgehead over the Rhine and establish a north-south pincer around the Ruhr Valley. It is no coincidence that Montgomery, humble as ever, insists he should lead this bold thrust. Eisenhower and the Americans be damned. First days of the offensive, the Soviets retake much of the territory captured during a limited offensive by Army Group Center in August. The primary target of the attack is a narrow corridor between Army Group Center and Army Group North, near the Gulf of Riga, which could provide an escape route for Schörner's men. But escape is not to be. Of them do die, fighting in the name of the fatherland. September 1944, the Central Pacific, Operation Stalemate 2. The clearing of the Palau Island before the small island is cleared of enemy resistance. Knowing the Japanese reputation for fighting to the last man, the general's staff is not nearly as confident. Stalemate 2 is aptly named, for it is an example of the strategic disagreements that have plagued the war in the Pacific. The Navy favors a Central Pacific drive, securing deepwater ports and airfields from which to support its massive carrier task forces strikes on Japan. The Army, particularly General Douglas MacArthur, pleads for a return to the Philippines and restoration of American honor. The decision to take or not to take the Palau Island chain went all the way to Admiral Chester Nimitz, the Pacific Theater's supreme commander. After considering all sides, shall go in full array. Now, with the arrival of the B-29 Superfortress and the 21st Bomber Command on Saipan, that promise is being fulfilled. The skies over Tokyo and over Japan's ports and industrial centers will again be filled with the drone of U.S. planes. Until now, the United States has had neither the plane capable of making such a long trip nor a land base from which to operate. With production of the B-29 and capture of Saipan in the Marianas Islands 3 months ago, everything is now in place to launch regular, full-scale aerial attacks on Japan. Put quite simply, the B-29 can fly higher, faster, and farther than any plane that has come before it. Good thing, because even with the capture of Saipan, the trip to Japan and back is still 3,000 miles and takes 16 hours to complete. With its ability to fly in excess of 5,000 miles per trip, however, the Superfortress redefines the term long range. The B-29 is powered by 4 massive Pratt & Whitney Wasp engines and has a top speed exceeding 360 miles per hour. Its service ceiling is more than 6 miles above sea level. At this altitude, not only is the plane less vulnerable to attack from below, the air is very thin. But for the B-29, this poses no problem, for it is the Army Air Corps' first pressurized bomber. This allows its 14-man crew to forego the cumbersome flight gear and oxygen masks that their counterparts in other bombers wear. At 141 feet, the B-29's wingspan is longer than Wilbur Wright's first flight at Kitty Hawk. More wing can carry more weight, up to 20,000 pounds of bombs to be exact. Add flaps that constitute 1/5 of the wing's total area, and you can land the giant aircraft on a runway only 1.5 miles long. Planning for the Superfort began in the late 1930s when the Army Air Corps called for a plane that could fly a bomb load thousands of miles out to sea and return. Boeing answered with plans for the B-29, 50 tons of plans to be exact. Although they were finalized in 1940, it's been a long road to the Pacific for this revolutionary aircraft. There were problems with engine fires and skepticism on the part of the pilots who would fly this 60-ton behemoth that some describe as being similar to flying an apartment building. The first B-29s arrived in India and China last spring, but there were still design problems, and it became readily apparent that moving supply came from an eventful winter. September 1944, the Philippines. At 9:30 a.m. local time, U.S. planes appear in the skies over Manila Bay, adding the percussion of their guns and the bass of their engines to Filipino radios, music for your morning mood. U.S. Navy Avengers and Hellcats pound docks, merchant ships, warehouses, repair yards, and airfields in the Bay Area, eliciting cries from Filipinos against the brutal and merciless American devils. The Philippines is a different country from the one which President Manuel Quezon and General Douglas MacArthur were forced to leave more than 2 years ago. It is a country run by Quezon's former cronies who have allied themselves with their Asian big brother, the Japanese Empire. It is an alliance based on mutual respect of sovereignty and territory. And blatant fear of retribution should they not comply with Japanese wishes. When asked, would the sufferings of the people be greater if the Americans or if the Japanese considered us hostile? President of the independent Philippine Republic, Jose Laurel, without hesitation replied, I prefer that the Japanese do not consider us hostile. On 23 September, Laurel, prodded by his Japanese puppeteers, boldly declares war against the United States and England. Since then, Task Force 38, under the command of Admiral Mark Mitcher, has been pounding Japanese positions throughout the Philippines. On 31 August, while a portion of Mitcher's force diverted Japanese attention with attacks on the Volcano and Bonin Islands, the bulk of his prize take time out to enjoy a movie. Halsey radios his boss, Admiral Chester Nimitz. No damage to our surface forces, and nothing on the screen but Hedy Lamarr. 27 September 1944, Metz. Since becoming operational on 1st August 1944, the Third Army under General George Blood and Guts Patton has taken the fight straight to and out of the Germans. In less than 2 months, the Third Army has captured over 41,000 square miles of territory, liberated over 800 cities and towns, and cost the Wehrmacht over 120,000 casualties, the vast majority being prisoners who chose surrender over death for a cause they now consider hopeless. On 25 September, Patton's army is ordered to suspend all offensive operations and to assume an aggressive defense. With his recon units probing forward to the fortress city of Metz, the key to Patton's success, mobility, is taken away as his supplies of gasoline defense order is officially issued from his staff. The unenviable task of probing the defenses around Metz is given to units of 20 Corps under Major General Walton Walker. Nicknamed Bulldog for both his build and his fighting disposition, Walker admires Patton to the point of emulation and takes pride that his troops have been assigned the task of taking the city. As if fighting entrenched Germans isn't enough, Third Army now has to defend itself against Mother Nature. The soldiers in Patton's divisions find themselves without wet weather gear, which has been withheld in the rear. Third Army now must slog through gigantic seas of mud on roads the consistency of chocolate cream pies. Now competing with German booby traps and time bombs are the age-old enemies of all armies: trench foot, flu, and the assorted ailments that come from being too wet too long. Nevertheless, the probing attacks push off on time. The 90th, 83rd, and 5th Divisions, along with a task force of combat engineers and cavalry, driving from the north, encounter the expected stiff resistance. Still, the initial results are encouraging enough for one 5th Division regimental commander to recommend a frontal assault against Fort Tryon. Patton's chief of staff and his G3, dead set against the plan, are overruled by the general. Preceded by a massive aerial bombardment, the 5th Division's frontal assault against Metz begins on 3 October. After a week of sharp combat, the 5th manages to penetrate the outer defenses of Fort Tryon. Now, fighting among corridors of concrete and steel, the battle continues as step by step the enemy positions are reduced. Although the Germans have had adequate time to prepare their defenses, the tough, lean men of the Third Army continue to press forward, confident that they will break through the gateway to the Sahara and once again gain ground measured in miles, not yards. (6 October 1944, Western Germany. For the first time since Hitler began his conquest of Europe in 1938, a German city is imperiled from Allied ground attack. U.S. ground troops have penetrated the defensive system of concrete and steel pillboxes, known to the Germans as the West Wall, and to the Allies as the Siegfried Line. General Louis Craig's U.S. 9th Infantry Division faces what promises to be a hard-fought and bitter struggle to break through the Siegfried at the Herdken Forest. 20 miles to the north, the Americans of General Clarence Huebner's 1st Infantry Division are closing in on Aachen. The attack on the Herdken begins with a flourish as 84 P-47 Thunderbolts bombard the forest. Giving the Germans little time to think, U.S. artillery follows with a 3-minute round of intensive shelling. Whatever momentum is established by this onslaught is quickly lost as Craig next sends in his infantry to clear the forest. The Herdken itself is a formidable opponent. It is, notes one soldier, after conducting the initial reconnaissance into the forest, dark, foreboding, gloomy, and terrible. It is a forest primeval, so thick with evergreen trees that the only way for the infantry to maneuver through it is on its hands and knees. Its deep gorges and steep slopes meant more for goat than man. Besides the green hell of the Herdken, the veteran German infantry stands in the Allies' way. These defenders don't seem likely to give in easily. Even before the GIs have advanced 50 yards, the Germans have them dead in their sights, and the Americans' progress slows to a snail's pace. As the infantry wades through the thick forest, casualties mount. One must wonder whether anyone in the U.S. command paid attention to the initial reports of what they faced. Already, it is obvious that the Americans have entered a military quagmire, a place where each along the road to Aachen it faced constant German counterattacks. Now, however, it is closing in on all sides of the city. Piece by piece, its plan is coming together. Break through the Siegfried Line, cut the supply roads to the city, encircle it, isolate it, watch it fall. The fall of Aachen will provide the Allies a strategic point from which to attack the Siegfried Line from behind. It will make refugees of the German people, who for the first time will see where their politicians and generals and strutting Nazi youth have led them. The fall of Aachen will make Germany vulnerable as it has not been before. September 1944, Peleliu. Having secured the airfield and repelled a series of savage Japanese counterattacks, General William Rupertus' 1st Marine Division begins the grueling task of driving the enemy from the island's interior. Pre-invasion intelligence indicated Peleliu was relatively flat and covered in jungle. In fact, the island is a series of highly angled coral ridges and ravines covered only in scrub brush. In these ridges, Colonel Kunio Nakagawa has placed some of the toughest troops in all the Imperial Army. From his command post, deep inside a sheer cliff wall, Nakagawa has given orders that there will be no savage banzai charges on Peleliu. Here they will fight a different... Their strategy is as simple as it is brutal. Like a huge python, the 1st Marine Division forms a ring of death around the Japanese and, gradually tightening it, forces them into a smaller and smaller area of Peleliu's interior, on the side of Mount Umbrogal. Advancing only yards on some days, the Leathernecks go about the grim business of annihilating the Japanese garrison. Having assaulted the beaches, swamps, valleys, and ridges of Peleliu for an entire month, the 1st Marine Division, minus over 5,000 wounded, dead, and missing, is finally relieved by the Wildcats of the U.S. Army 81st Division on 15 October. Under the command of Major General Paul J. Mueller, the Wildcats lay siege to the Japanese positions in the hills. Where the Marines depended on the inherent toughness and fighting spirit of the individual rifleman, the Army relies on sheer material might. Combat engineers bulldoze the coral into huge ramps so tanks and flamethrowers can drive right into the mouths of enemy caves and fire point blank. Artillery crews return Japanese rifle fire with 155mm howitzers. Driving from the north side of Umbrogao, the Wildcats establish a foothold on a desolate peak named Brother One. Now the endgame begins. Army units illuminate the only freshwater pond at the center of the pocket, cutting off the Japanese water supply. In late November, with fewer than 100 combat troops still at his disposal, Colonel Nakagawa sends a terse message to Tokyo that he has come to the end of his ability to resist. In a quiet ceremony, Nakagawa burns the regimental colors and commits suicide. The Wildcats make a final push on the morning of 25 November, flooding into the pocket from all sides. Resistance is crushed by 10:30 a.m. At 11 a.m., General Mueller receives word from his frontline commanders that the enemy has fulfilled his determination to fight to the death. In all, the battle for Peleliu and surrounding islands has claimed the lives of more than 10,000 Imperial soldiers and 1,400 U.S. Marine and Army troops. Thousands more are wounded. Victory over this tiny dot in the vast Pacific has been achieved, but the fanatical Japanese have once again forced the victors to pay a terrible price. The key to the Allies' logistical problems is in their hands, yet they remain unable to open the door. Convince the American people that the end of the war will bring a new era in international relations, ending centuries of self-serving alliances and power politics. Realizing that lofty goal, however, looks to be a troublesome proposition. Stalin, whose blood-stained hands are testament to his ruthless self-interest, is not likely to be swayed by the American public's moral posturing. Assurances from London that defeat of the Axis is Britain's only goal ring hollow in the ears of experienced diplomats. If Britain is unable to re-establish its far-flung colonial empire, her days as a world power are finished. It seems highly unlikely that any British politician, least of all Winston Churchill, will be willing to let that happen without a fight. So even as Roosevelt promises the dawn of a new day, Churchill and Stalin carve up Central and Eastern Europe as if it were a birthday cake. With the stroke of a pen, Bulgaria and Romania fall into the communist fold. In return, Stalin acknowledges that British interests will be dominant in Greece. Elsewhere, inter-Allied cooperation abounds. It is agreed that Yugoslavia, a country already racked by bitter ethnic divisions, will be split 50-50. Poland, however, poses a more difficult problem. The exiled Polish government in London insists on the restoration of Poland's territorial integrity at war's end. The Soviets, however, have no intention of handing over territory they have paid for in blood. Intent on securing Russia's western border, Stalin has installed in Poland a puppet regime which toes the party line, insisting that the Polish people demand Russian control. As Churchill heads for home, he is pleased with the results of the meeting. Stalin has been cordial and quick to deal, agreeing to join the war against Japan within 3 months of a German capitulation. Equally important to Churchill, however, is the bargain they have struck over Central Europe. Stalin's recognition of British interests in Greece gives the Prime Minister reason to hope that, despite dwindling military and economic relevance, he may just be able to secure Britain a position of power and prestige in the post-war world. in conjunction with Marshal Tito's partisan forces, launched their assault to capture Belgrade. For 1 week, in bitter hand-to-hand fighting, the Germans are pressed back to the city center. Desperately trying to stave off overwhelming odds, the German commander rejects the Soviet ultimatum to surrender. On 16 October, German resistance is crushed. The defense of Belgrade has cost the Wehrmacht 15,000 dead. The following day, the port of Dubrovnik and the city of Niš fall to Tito's partisans. With these losses, the most direct route for the evacuation of Army Group E out of Greece has been cut. Additionally, Weitz is faced with another 120-mile gap with no soldiers to fill it, and no prospect of reinforcements in the foreseeable future. Still, Weitz's prior planning has enabled Army Group E to organize an orderly retreat. Here, too, luck aids the Germans. The Balkan Air Force, consisting of 8 squadrons of aircraft, which had been harrying the Germans in Yugoslavia, now